if you'd like to, or share with anyone that wasn't able to come along today. As with all talking spaces, it is lunchtime, so please do feel free to eat lunch and sit back and listen. We'd also encourage you to get involved, ask questions, join the conversation and share your own experiences if you'd like to. So feel free to use the chat function and we'll pick up any questions and comments after each speaker, and there'll also be an opportunity to ask questions or share your own experiences after we've heard from all of our contributors. So as I've said, I've got Katie with me today helping with some of the technical behind the scenes elements to the session. So between us we'll try and keep an eye on the chat and come to any raised hands after each speaker is finished, if that's okay. So just as an overview of today's session, we recognise that in order to achieve the shared vision of making our move to address inequality and empower everyone to be active in a way that works for them, we also need to make sure that everyone receives information in a way that works for them. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about some of the practical things that we can all do to ensure that communications are as accessible as possible. I will just say at this stage that there's a lot that many of you and your organisations will already be doing, and there'll be things that could be improved and things you perhaps haven't thought about yet. So today is really a bit of an overview and then some specific examples. It may be then that the conversation continues beyond this session, or that a few of us identify particular training needs. So today we have Stacey Johnson, Communications Advisor at Activity Alliance, who's going to start by talking through us some of the Activity Alliance's Inclusive Communications Guide. And then we are going to hear from Michelle Drain and Vicky Vale from the Community Inclusion Engagement team at EMH Care and Support, who are going to share some of what they've been doing around accessible communications. And finally, we'll hear from Becky Daykin from Deaf-initely Women, who will be talking about the working groups that she's been involved in, which are specifically for deaf, blind and hard of hearing women, including some of the barriers and communication needs that they've been looking at. So thank you all for agreeing to share some of your experiences and knowledge with us. It's very much appreciated. And now I'll hand over to Stacey from Activity Alliance, if that's all right, Stacey.
Yep. Thanks, Nikki. Are you okay to? Thank you. Oh, hi. As Nikki mentioned, I'm Stacey, and I'm going to be doing a very quick overview of inclusive comms. And the way I approached this presentation was basically to what helped me when I first joined Activity Alliance. So I've worked for Activity Alliance for just under 3 years, and I work on the Get Out, Get Active programme and our inclusive activity programme. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So what I'll try and cover in 15 minutes is business case, fonts, words, language, digital comms, but focusing on specifically social media and use of images. So only a few things. Next slide, please. So these are our inclusive comms resources. You can find them all on the Activity Alliance website. And we've got some fact sheets as well as the Inclusive Comms Guide, or the Inclusive Comms Bible, as we call it. And they're really, the fact sheets are fantastic. They're short, sweet, easy to get your head around. But again, I think everything's going to be shared with you all after this, so you should be able to find them absolutely fine. And next slide, please. And I'll start with the business case. So why inclusive and accessible comms? So 1 in 5 of us is a disabled person. The UK population continues to age. And I think one of the biggest things that didn't frighten me, but something I was completely unaware about when I first joined Activity Alliance, was the purchasing power of disabled people. And the click-away pound, which is insane because it's like 17.1 billion from 2019, which it's a lot of money. So why shouldn't our communications be accessible? And it's the right thing to do, and everyone's responsibility. So if you go on to the next slide and then click again, and I'll get to it with social media. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So when I first joined Activity Alliance, social media is a world of its own. And when it comes to accessible comms, there's a lot that you can do, and there's a lot of new things that social media has. So the bullet points on there are like, I'd say the essentials that you should be doing on social media. So image descriptions, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later on. Describing photos or putting an alternative text, or as it's abbreviated, alt text, for people who are blind or partially sighted is really important, as it allows them to build a mental picture of what someone who is sighted is seeing automatically. And if your graphic is very text heavy, you can include a link to the website or in the post, like in the written text that accompanies the picture, where people can access all of the details from that image as well. But don't fall into the trap of thinking you have to describe every single detail of the image. Just pick out a few key details that paint the picture. Personally, I like to pretend I'm on catchphrase, so you see what you see. The next one I'll cover is emojis. So text-to-speech software, this is something I was completely unaware about, reads out the description for every single emoji which is used. So be careful with the amount of emojis you include. For example, if you put 4 star emojis, the software would read out star, 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 which can get annoying. But also watch out, as not every emoji always means what you think it does. And a useful tool that I found was emojipedia.org, if you aren't sure, it's great. It's a great website. Next one's videos. As I think a lot of you will probably know, videos are a great way to get engagement, but they don't need to be audio described, as long as they're audio led. So the way that I see it is, if it's on screen, it doesn't need audio description, but make sure to use subtitles. You might find this yourselves. So if you're scrolling through like Facebook or Twitter, a lot of the time people don't use sound anymore and they just have the subtitles on. It's just an easier thing to do and you get more engagement that way. And that's covering captions. Next one's hashtags. So we live in a world of hashtags, but they aren't always accessible. When you're using hashtags, always use camel case, which is capitalising the first letter of every word. It means that the word in a hashtag are read out correctly by a screen reader, but it also makes them easier to read for everyone else. And ever since I learned that, I found it a lot more difficult to read hashtags that don't have camel case. And social media is ever changing and adding new accessibility features, so be sure to check them out. Recently, Instagram added an alt text feature, which it's great that they've clocked onto it, basically. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as an organisation, we use the social model of disability. So we try to use more positive language when we talk about disability and disabled people. And this table shows some examples of what we use, and it makes our communications more inclusive as the language is more positive. So we use things like wheelchair user instead of words with a negative like connotation to it, which is like wheelchair bound. Again, this slide will be shared with you all afterwards, but what I would like to say there as well, everyone has their own preferences, so try and approach a communication as not a one-size-fits-all approach. Next slide, please. I'm aware I'm going really fast, by the way, but there's a lot to cover. The average age in the UK, the average reading age, not the average age, is 9. So people are less likely to read complex stories or pieces of information. So my top tips for this is avoid using jargon words and acronyms. The world is full of acronyms and they mean different things to different sectors. So we tend to use them for ease, but think about your audience. Is that acronym part of their everyday? I'm not from the sports sector and I still struggle with acronyms, and I don't always know what they mean. So sometimes I'm like, can you just explain what that is, please? Use inclusive language, as I said before, so try and use the positive instead of a negative. A big one is plain English. So maybe don't count your sentences, but try keeping a sentence length to 15 to 20 words. Use everyday words and make it personal with we, us and you. Use active sentences and not passive ones. The Plain English website has loads of guides and they offer some really nice training. It does feel like an English lesson sometimes, but it's really fantastic to revisit some of that as well. Something that helped me with active and passive sentences, next slide please, is the Hemingway editor app. It's not an app, it's something that you can just Google and it comes up. It's helped me massively when I write stories, and it points out active sentences. It also points out if a sentence is hard to read. It gives you a readability score, and it's just helped me out hugely. It's one that I would recommend to absolutely everyone, especially if there's like a certain reading age that you're trying to aim for. As we know, the average reading age is 9. Next slide, please. Fonts and colours, yay. So I don't want to go into this too much because I could talk about it for a little while. We want a clear font and a good contrast is vital when it comes to things like this. So we use sans serif font, which is Arial, Calibri, things like that. And it's how I describe it to people is the bits without the flicky bits. And the size 12 font should be used as a minimum. It's the easiest for people to read comfortably. And easy read size is about size 14. The use of bold or size should be used to emphasize rather than underline or italics due to it being easy to read. Also avoid underlining as it implies that it could be a hyperlink, so it could be confusing. But if your organisation has brand guidelines, obviously they should be inclusive and accessible too. Again, ask the person if you're doing some communication for a specific group or a specific person. Just remember that it's the one size doesn't fit all. Next slide, please. Okay, so how easy is your communications to read? One thing that I learned when I joined Activity Alliance is colour contrast. It can be a massive barrier. So the use of colour on the slide that you can see highlights the need for good contrast to make text easier to read. My go-to website for absolutely everything when it comes to colour is a website called WebAIM, where you can put in the colour code and then it tells you whether it meets a certain accessibility standard. So we aim for a AA standard, and that means that it's more accessible then and it's easier to read. The ideal is AAA, but I'm not going to go into the specifics because that's a whole other thing. Text should be read left to right, or an unjustified text is easier to read than justified. As you can see on the other side of this slide, there's a lot more white space in justified text, which can be more tiring on the eyes. And then the other thing on there is the thing at the bottom shows you what someone with dyslexia might see. Obviously it's not 100%, and everyone sees things differently, and some people use text to speech or speech to text software and other assisted technology, so it's one of them that, again, one size fits all. If someone has a specific communication request, try and fit it to that, but also remember you can't cater for everyone. So if you just do your best, that's better than doing nothing at all. Next slide, please. Okay, so use of images. This is a big one because I know a lot of people use things like Canva, which ends up being an image if you post it on social media. My top tips here would be limit text over image, as a screen reader won't be able to read the text on an image and it will just read out the alt tag. So it's best to have an image and place the text elsewhere, like in the post, or if you can, direct them to somewhere else where they can find the information instead of it just being on the image. Meaning only via colour, so use shapes as well as colours as it's more accessible. One that doesn't do this well is the tube map. I mean, I just get lost anyway, but the tube map's terrible because all the colours can blend into each other and who knows where you end up. Avoid having too much information on an image as well, as it becomes crowded and difficult for people to interpret. And you can avoid that, which I'll explain later on, and use images where everyone is taking part, and not just cast off to the side, because at the end of the day we want to show positive portrayal of things and not a negative one, unless that's the message that you're going for. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit more about alt text. So when it comes to alt tags and alt text, as I said, I like to play catchphrase. So it's like a say what you see. So for this sort of thing, it'd be like 2 women taking part in seated exercise using TheraBands. And you can, with alt tags, you can say either whether it's decorative or needs description. I always try to put a description unless it's a logo that appears like on the top of every page, because if you put that is a description every time, it's then read out every time. If you go on to the next slide, I can explain it a bit better. So if say if the Get Out Get Active logo appeared on every page, it would be decorative, or else every time the new page would come around, the screen reader would read out Get Out Get Active logo funded by, and it's not, you don't want to like lose that flow of whatever it is that they're reading. Next slide, please. So an infographic, one thing I got taught while here is infographics can contain a lot of information, and the best thing to do would be to include a link to the website in the post copy where people can access all of the information that is presented as the text on that image, because not everyone's able to digest that information, and I think it's easier with infographics to get lost in alt texts. Next slide, please. Promise I'm coming to the end soon. Accessible formats and assistive technology. As I've said before, one size doesn't fit all. So how do we make our communications inclusive to disabled people? A good starting point I find is to get to know the types of barriers disabled people experience, and then look at what you need to do to remove those barriers. As you'll see, is some of the barriers or the main barriers and the groups. I'm not going to go through them, but yeah, it's just to be a bit mindful of like what is out there and not just assume what people need. Next slide, please. Which is accessible formats. So these are all the different types of accessible formats which can combat them barriers, and some accessible formats are easier and cheaper to do, so you need to think about budget and need. So not everything needs to be Braille, because there's not many people in the world that read Braille. One that I push quite heavily for is accessible Word documents, which can often be done in-house. Microsoft is a fantastic piece of software, and they're always updating their accessibility. A big one as well for me is subtitles. YouTube can auto-transcribe videos, but you have to dedicate time to double check the words are correct. So when people say GOGA, which is Get Out Get Active, it sometimes come out as yoga. So you've got to double check that one. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the accessibility checker in Microsoft, which it's super easy to do. Next slide, sorry, Casey. So yeah, I've had to screen grab some of this, so apologies. So if you went onto your review panel in Microsoft, just check accessibility, and then it comes up saying whether you need to add an alt text if something's out of line, and it just kind of throws up like, oh, this is an issue, you might want to look at that, and then you can change it to make it as accessible. And then sometimes, I say sometimes, so when you've like got a Word document that's accessible and you export that into a PDF, that PDF then has all of the features that you've done in the Word document, and it takes it across. So it means that you've got a more accessible PDF as well. And the next slide, which is just some examples of assistive communication technology. And I feel like I've absolutely flown through that. So sorry, but the next slide is my contact details, where I'd be happy to answer any questions and for you to get in contact with me.
Thanks, Stacey. Thanks so much for that. And I'm glad we're recording the session, because there's so much in there that I am going to have to go back and watch it again, just to take it all in. But I did ask you to give us an overview, and you've definitely done that. So thank you very much. And we will be sharing the link to the full guide as well, so people can have a look for themselves and take it in their own time. But before we move on, did anyone have any questions or thoughts that they wanted to share with Stacey now? I know Stacey's going to stay to the end as well, but if anyone wants to ask anything now, then feel free. Thank you. You've got some fans in the chat anyway, Stacey, so thank you for that. Yeah, okay, so I think what we'll do now, if that's okay, is I think yep, Stacey will stay on till the end, if that's all right. So if anyone does have anything they want to ask, there's time later on. But for now, I'd like to welcome Michelle and Vicky from EMH Care and Support to talk about how they create accessible, easy read information. So we'll pass over to you, Michelle and Vicky, if that's all right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, everybody. It's lovely to be here and to meet you all. I'll just give Vicky a little bit of time to share the screen. So we've got our presentation up there.
Right, got it. I'll go on. Go on that just so you can see it a bit better. Can you all see that okay? Yeah.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Vicky. Yeah, that's great.
Lovely. Yeah. So, hello, everybody. I'm Victoria or Vicky, whichever you prefer. I answer to anything. And I'll be delivering the training with my fabulous manager.
Oh, hi, I'm Michelle. So Vicky and I, there's just us in our team. So we are part of the Community Inclusion and Engagement team. We work for a charity called EMH Care and Support. The EMH stands for East Midlands Housing, where the care and support side of a big social housing group. You might have known us as Enable before, about 7 years ago, before we joined EMH. So we predominantly work with adults with learning disabilities of all abilities, people with autism and mental health. So we support a very wide group of people, mainly across Derbyshire, but also areas of Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire.
So we're just going to kick off with a bit of an introduction to Easy Read and what it means to a gentleman called Kevin. He's been a bit of a guide for us in making sure that when we send information out, it is accessible. It's one of his great passions. So in his own words, it's really important to him. Making information more understandable means that they're actually in a better position to take that information in themselves. He's always enjoyed helping me make it and help anybody make it. And he'd rank it 10 out of 10 in terms of his list of priorities and how important it is to him. Just to echo what other things you've heard, him himself and other people that receive information are the best people to give advice on Easy Read. They're the ones that are using it. They're the ones in the best position to tell you what they need. So when you are making accessible information, unless it's like a big, group mail out or anything where it wouldn't be realistic, if it is for a specific person, like a letter, well, do try and involve them, as they can advise you on what works for them, really.
So we do Easy Read and other formats, mainly because that's what's right to do and what people need and what they've asked us to do. And we've worked very closely with people we support, to look at the different formats. But there is what's called the Accessible Information Standard, which has been around for a little while, and it was predominantly kind of aimed at the NHS information, but it is also aimed at any kind of adult social care service as well. So it's not really law, but it is there as a guide, and there are more resources than there used to be because of this guide. So there is a link at the bottom which will take you to an NHS website, and within there's lots of documents about this accessible information standard. So it kind of helps you to know what best practice is and what's expected as a minimum. So if you do have anybody that visits the doctors or hospitals, they should be able to easily find information in Easy Read.
So in terms of what accessible / easy read information actually is, so that's visually presented written information. It's generally targeted at people with a learning disability or autism, but we have found that it can be a massive help to people with other conditions and learning difficulties of other things like that, because it's for people that benefit from having clearly written words with pictures that help them understand, and it breaks down information into smaller step-by-step sentences. So I'm sure we've all been in that position when we've got a new gadget, we've got instructions that might as well be in Swahili for however understandable they are, and it's just sort of embodying that spirit of making sure that you're actually able to get information in the right way. So each person with a learning disability should have something called a communication passport in their support plans, and that will say what their communication and style and aid actually is. So that might be Easy Read, that might be Braille, that might be an iPad, all sorts of talking picture guides, and anything really. If someone has communication difficulties, they'll usually have support from a speech and language team, and that team will have helped them to learn and use additional or alternative communication methods. And more than likely, they'll have been using those methods from childhood. So that's why it's so important that you use whatever that person is familiar with.
So here's some examples of some software that we generally use. So the predominant one that we use is a software called Photo Symbols. It's available as a website link, so you can go online through it. You don't need a disc or anything like it used to be years ago. You do have to subscribe, so it can be a little bit costly if you sign up to it, but if you look at lots of easy read information from the government or anywhere else, most documents do use photo symbols, and later on we'll show you what that looks like. There's also one called Widgit. Widgit has developed a lot over the years. It used to just kind of be black and white stick figures. Now it's quite colourful, and it comes, they offer lots of different packages of what type of widget package you want. So photo symbols generally are used for older adults that haven't, maybe when they were younger, maybe didn't have access to any kind of software. And this is usually what you'll see in Easy Read. If you're going to like schools where, you know, there's sections for young people with learning disabilities, you're more likely to see something called Widgit. So that is where it looks like little stick drawings. And so if you're working with younger people with learning disabilities, that might be a better one to use. But again, you know, probably the best thing to do is to ask people what they prefer. So those two you do pay for, but there are free resources, and they all kind of tend to be a little bit, they're all animated and characters, you know, like cartoon or line drawings, rather than the photographs that they use in photo symbols. So all of those links there, you could go on and have a look at. Widgit do some brilliant free resources. So at the moment they do it on topical things. So at the moment there's quite a lot of resources on there for the coronation, and so people that have already created them, they will share them and you can download them for free. So it's worth going on the Widgit website just to see what the free resources are that you can just take. The ones that are the links at the bottom, so there's Change People, they used to be known as Change Picture Bank. Easy on the Eye is one that the NHS have developed, and all the other ones are kind of ones that other organisations let you use for free. Easy Health is really good because they've created lots of documents about different topics around people's health, and again they're free to download. So there's some really good resources there to try. So the photo symbol, I think we've already said this, haven't we? I've already done this bit, yeah. So usually you would use, with photo symbols, it will be one image, and then you'd have a sentence maybe of like three or four lines. So that one image needs to represent the whole community keywords, you know, the main things you want to get across to people. So Widgit is different. So every single word has a symbol, even and the. So with Widgit, you do have to take you know, symbols out because there's just too many otherwise. So you type it like you would a document in Word, and for every word you type, it will come up with a little symbol above it. You can replace those as well. So for some symbols, I've found that they're not very representative of what you're trying to say. If you want to say something like I like, it comes up with a love heart. So I've always changed a love heart for a smiley face. Otherwise the message might be a little bit wrong. But if you do ever put any of these into a document, you do have to acknowledge and say on the document that you have used them and you're licensed. So you have to acknowledge the software.
So we're just going to go through some top tips now, and some of these, they'll probably sound a bit familiar, but if anything, hopefully it'll make it a bit easier to remember. So number one, the text you're writing should be either size 14 or size 16. So that's the an accessible size that it will print out onto. And the font should ideally be Comic Sans MS or Century Gothic. And the reason for that is, if you have a look at how it's written, the probably other letters, but specifically the letter A, they're written as people, if they are able to write, they would have been taught to write it like that at school. So that's what separates this font from something like Arial or something else. So it's a bit more realistic to what they might write themselves. Sentences need to be clearly separate, short and to the point. So there's lots of different ways you can separate them. You can do numbers, you can do bullet points, you can put them into a table, but there wants to be, you know, a good few lines between each sentence, and they just need to say, it sounds bad, but the smallest amount that you want to say. Don't try and go into lots of detail of, you know, in the spirit of a fully informed consent. Just try not to waffle, basically. Ensure pictures are working with the words and not instead of them. So what that means is especially with photo symbols, try to find one picture that represents that sentence rather than, you know, half a dozen pictures that represent each word, because otherwise it just gets incredibly confusing and it makes the language actually harder to understand. And make sure the pictures are big enough to see clearly. So you'll see in examples later, but it kind of ties in with the other, just to, you know, not do lots of little pictures that represent all the words. Pick one and make it nice and big, really. So to continue with that, abbreviations, long words, jargon are just a big no. For use plain English and simple language. Don't worry about being patronizing. You're not. So a person is far more likely, I think, to feel silly if they're trying to make sense of something that is hard to understand than reading something that's perhaps a bit simpler and makes perfect sense. So think before you type, and that means what's the most important information you want to include, or alternatively, put in all your information and then go through it and think, does that really need to be in there? But we'll go into more detail on that in a shortly. Keep documents as short as possible. So that means the actual length itself, having short sentences is fine, but don't let it, you know, start to become a 10-page document or a 20. I have fallen into that trap. And keep it as short as you can. And above all, use your common sense. The more you do it, the easier it will become. None of us were born psychically knowing how to make easy read information. It's just about getting to know who you're working with.
Yeah, so as Vicky started to mention, what you could do is to put your normal information there, and then you might want to do what we call a spring clean. So you could take out any extra words that don't really make a significant difference. So we like to think of it as like decluttering your wardrobe. Just go through it one sentence at a time and ask yourself, you know, does it need to be in there? Does it help with the information? Could you take it out without it affecting the message? And can you make it shorter? So, for example, on the left is maybe something you would have written to start with. So, and on the right are the versions that we've turned into easy read. So I'll just give you a bit of time just to read that and compare the differences where we've either changed difficult words or we've taken words out to just make it slightly shorter. So sometimes we just have to think, will people understand the terminology that we're using as well? Like, do people know what online means? You know, we all know it, but we're just assuming then everybody else does know it. So in some things, you know, for us, we've just done a digital inclusion project, and not many people we work with had ever used the internet or a computer or a website or social media. This is why we still keep everything in printed version. So some of the terminology, even like online and digital, they wouldn't know what that meant. So you might need an extra sentence to maybe describe some of the words that you're using.
Come on, work with me here.
There we go.
So what you're looking at now is one of the examples we've put together of something that is easy read. So this particular example is question is something called a chat card, and these are cards that, you know, the wonderful Michelle has made for when we've done activities around building connections, social activities, relationships, just kind of help a conversation going. And as you see, they're in the right style, they're using that font, they've got one image per picture, so that's like a really nice example of something that you would cut out and use at an activity. And this is something that I made for some online activities I did at the beginning of the year, telling people about Zoom activities. So again, it just gives the information that they need to be able to join, when it is, what the activity is, and how to join. And at the top that it's saying Zoom activity. So those are a couple of examples there just to show you what something in easy read can look like, really. And that's it. Thank you.
We could have done so much more, but we didn't want to go on too long. But you can contact us if you want any more information, or if you need to. Thank you for the, if you need to do any, we can provide some training as well, and help you. If you start to create it, you can always send it us and say, what do you think of this, to look over it for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much both. That was great. And I think at the start you said you highlighted the you know, the importance of involving the people that the information's for, and checking that that works for them. And I think that's really important. Thank you. We do have one more contributor, but did anybody have anything burning they wanted to ask Michelle and Vicky at this point? Okay, right. And I know we're sort of coming towards the end of the session now, so I'm going to ask, I think, Katie to play just a part of the clip that we've recorded. Unfortunately, Becky from Deaf-initely Women isn't able to be here in person today, but she really wanted to share her experiences with you. So we had a chat last week about some of the walking groups that she's involved in, which are specifically for deaf, blind and hard of hearing women. And we're going to share part of that recording now, and I think we'll put a link to the full clip online as well, if that's okay. With there, Katie. Oh, and the hopefully you'll hear the sound, but there is subtitles as well, if that's an issue. Thank you.
I'm just thinking, I can't hear it. Can other people not
No,
hear
I
it as
can't
well?
hear it, Katie. No.
Okay, let me just try and see if it's. I did switch the sound on, but let me just. Please, computer sound. Let's start again. Still. No.
I think I can see it says on the YouTube video that it says that it's on
Oh,
mute.
yes.
So I'm Becky Daykin.
Good spot.
I've been with Deaf-initely Women.
Yep. Is this right now? Good.
So first, can you just tell me about yourself and about your role at Deaf-initely Women?
Yeah,
Please.
so I'm Becky Daykin. I've been with Deaf-initly Women now for nearly 2 years. I originally was employed by them as a social connector coordinator, so it was my role to kind of create more opportunities for deaf women to connect, and digitally, socially, financially, that kind of role. And I had a team of social connectors that all worked together to support that project. From that project, what we did is we did some activities in some of the peer support groups we ran, just to find out what sort of activities the deaf women would like to access, that they felt they couldn't access at the moment. And the number one thing was walking groups for deaf people. So that's why we then looked for funding to set up the walks, and to make them as accessible as possible, so that everybody felt they could be included. So that project's running until the end of May, and we've set up 5 walks altogether. I think the target was 3, so we've already done the target of walks. We've done 3 walks and we've got 2 more to go. We have had to book interpreters for most of the walks, and obviously that's expensive, but that comes under our funding that we had for the project. So that's been really useful, because it wouldn't be accessible to everybody if we weren't able to do that, especially on the guided walk. I can sign for myself and I can communicate, but I'm not at the level where I'm an interpreter, or perhaps at the level where people would need that information. So that's important, even for group where there are other deaf people sometimes. We have kind of advertised the walks so that we know who's booking on, how many people are booked on. We've limited the spaces to 15 because we feel that's what we could manage with a group of leaders. And we have asked them what communication barriers they have and what support they would like for the walk, so that we know what support we need to book. And again, that's been quite challenging, because a lot of BSL interpreters can get booked up very quickly. So it's been quite difficult to get set dates quite close together, if you know what I mean. So we've had to have more time to arrange the walks, so that we know we've definitely got the right communication support for people on the walks. That's really important. The feedback we've had is that because the women can communicate with other people in the group,
easily. They really enjoy that element, the social element that perhaps they would miss out on in other groups. So even for me, being quite confident and assertive, I am profoundly deaf when I lip read. So I go to a running group with my dog, a canicross group, and even though they're very good and they do adapt things, I do still feel miss out on. I feel I miss out on all the social side of it that other people get, and sometimes I even miss out on the introduction and things like that. But I don't want to keep having to stop the group to tell everybody because it feels unnatural. If that makes sense, that feels unnatural to me. So things like deaf awareness, I think, for groups would be quite important. There are organisations, including Deaf-initely Women, that offer deaf awareness training, but obviously that would need funding for that. But that's something that could be done, deaf awareness. There's also things like teaching people how to be more accessible in terms of the communication. So in advertising, when we've advertised a work, we've done a poster, we've also done a description, and then we've also done a video, a BSL signed video, and put captions on the video as well. Because a lot of the time, written English isn't always accessible to deaf people whose first language is BSL. It's a completely different language, so we wouldn't expect them to receive some information and that information be accessible. We would need to make sure we make it accessible by doing a signed video to go with that information. And it's the same, I think, for feedback, registration forms, that kind of thing. So when the women are coming to the walks and the different areas have needed registration forms for new workers to be completed, we've made sure the interpreter's there in case anybody needs support with the information that's on the forms.
That's really interesting, because I must admit I would probably assume that somebody would be able to read what was written even if they couldn't hear what was being said, so that's not always the case.
It's a completely different language, and I mean, some deaf people, everybody's different. Some deaf people, that's fine, but I wouldn't assume that information is accessible. We always make sure that there is an interpreter there or translator that can translate that information into BSL.
That's a really good point, thank you.
We've also, I think, when we're risk assessing the read, because all of the board leaders that we have are deaf themselves, deaf-blind or hard of hearing, we're more aware of the things we need to think about. For example, cyclists coming up behind, quite often they'll shout, but I can't hear them. So we've kind of factored that into all the risk assessment to make sure that it's always a member, a walk leader at the back, who's very aware, making sure they're keeping aware of what's coming, because we wouldn't want a cyclist to just kind of speed past one of the walkers and startle them. So we have, I do think it's important that the leaders are aware, and that you work with organisations like us who are user-led, who have more lived experience of being deaf and what the barriers are, really.
Yes.
Just finished it there so we don't run out of time.
Thanks, Katie. That's great. Yeah, there was a couple more minutes left on that, but we'll share the link as well. I know Becky was really keen to share some of the work that's gone into putting those groups on, and some of the barriers and communication needs that have been addressed. So we've just got a couple of minutes for questions, but I also wanted to know if I know we've got a couple of colleagues on the call who have been involved in the Deaf-initely Women walks, and whether there was anything they wanted to add, or generally otherwise whether anybody had any questions before we finish up. Sorry, I'm just spotting hands. I think as Tina.
Yeah, just following on from where Becky finished, just interested to find out from some of the other walk leaders, and can see Helen's on the call, about how the back marker would then communicate with the group. So Becky, I'm working with Becky on a walk coming up very soon, and this is one thing that I'm sort of toying over. The walk leader at the back obviously can be aware, but then how do they let the other people ahead of them know, just some idea of how that's worked out in practical terms.
Helen, I know you've worked with Becky as well. Are you able to answer that, or was something else you wanted to add?
I suppose in terms of that, what we had was somebody at the back, and we could almost sort of move forward with that communication. So as we saw someone come in, someone from the back would move forward to explain to that person that we kind of needed to pull over to the left-hand side. Our walk was a little bit different when we did ours, because we didn't actually have an interpreter. So it was just Becky and I trying to make the best of it, I suppose, in terms of that session. But definitely one just to see how Becky wants to manage that, I would say, Tina, in terms of those sessions, because she was very clear of kind of how she wanted things to work. The only point I suppose I was putting my hand up was just to say the wealth of knowledge that Deaf-initely Women have got. I've worked with 2 Beckys from there, and they've also commented on a report for the Activity Alliance for Get Out, Get Active in Amber Valley. And I just think the thoughts that they can provide and the feedback is invaluable from a local level, and definitely looking forward really to supporting them some more to develop some resources locally, and also to set up some sessions. So we're looking to set up some self-defence sessions with Deaf-initely Women, and to support some more walks moving forward as well. I just think they're brilliant, and it was a real pleasure to lead the walk with them the other week, and I learnt so much.
Great, thank you, Tina and Helen. Yeah, and it sounds like the walks have been a great success so far, and Becky was very complimentary about Walk Derbyshire as well, so it's great to hear you've been working so well together. Katie, you've got your hand up, I think. That's not Wendy, Katie.
Sorry, I was I'm confusing everybody by being on 2 computers at the moment. Yeah, I was just going to I guess just sort of ask Stacey a little bit about the sort of accessible comms, and I suppose the different groups. Does she feel she has to choose a group to communicate with if there's kind of differences in the way that people want to, or do you find that by mentioning those things that you've done, Stacey, that does tend to support most people who have got different barriers? Or do you, I know you talked about groupings and things like that, but if there was something that was quite blanket, or something that you did want to do, if it was a social media post, would you always do more than one post, or would you kind of think about the most people you could reach, that you could reach with one post, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So in terms of like things that we put on the website, so if we like have a report, we do different formats of it. So we do like an easy read format, BSL format, depending on what the report is. But as for social media, if I'm completely honest, I blanket it, because social media moves really quickly, and I think the more people you can reach, the better. But you can't reach everyone using one form of communication. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think it's because obviously we do a lot of, a lot of our communications. As you will know, that you've got loads of jobs to do, and you want to do the best for each of the things you do. But sort of, I guess, thinking, if we do in a social media post, do all the things we can, like having an image with alt text and nothing else, and putting the stuff in the post so that people can use screen readers and things. Whether we were sort of missing anything else we need to do, but no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for all the questions and to all the contributors. It's been a really insightful session, definitely a lot to take in, and some really useful resources that were shared in the presentations that I know I'm going to go back and have a look at, and yeah, just a lot to take in, I think, but hopefully people have found it a good overview, and it'd be great to hear from people if there's any particular points that people want to follow up with. I know myself and Katie are going on an accessible comms conference in Leicester in a couple of weeks' time, so we're definitely hoping to build on some of the knowledge from today,